Sorry about the late start. Yeah, today's going to be a bit of a different episode. We're going to have, I guess, a bit of talk that we had online about just how the software development life cycle and how a software company, which includes a lot of companies, most companies these days, how all those roles change, because we certainly don't use any agile roles or any of the practices in agile. We've dropped nearly everything from agile to go way faster than those practices would allow, which is a tough thing for people to hear. The other part is it's going to be kind of a meta episode. While we're talking about this, I'm going to start doing the live streams on YouTube so that people can do that. And slowly, I think over the next week or so, we're going to start to do that as well through what are the Periscope, Twitter, LinkedIn, and other things. So we should have kind of a neat audience through those places, but we want to keep the core people kind of going through here. So I'm going to switch my camera off and see if running OBS will interfere or help or whatever. But we can look at some of these, for a topic to discuss while I fiddle and see if this actually works. I'll draw a couple of things on the side here about org structures, levels of management within companies, and how all that is changed with doing, by doing other things. Am I muted again? Sorry. Faster than agile would be heroic. Yes. Well, agile in the truest sense of the word is really, I kind of came to the realization that it's a water is wet statement, because they say, well, business always changes. And if you really look at the deep sort of meaning of that, it's, yeah, that's like water is wet. Yes, business always has to change. Why are we even discussing agile? In order to exist in business, whether you have a pen and paper system or an automated system, you have to change with the market. Yes, sure, some things are, more amicable to changing if you're in a new area or a new market, or regulations are changing. You probably have to be, quote unquote, more agile than other software companies. So the idea that agile somehow is special because everyone else is, dumb, doing things in a very static way, is kind of a very straw man kind of proposition. So I don't know if you guys want to chime in to that. I don't want this to be monologue, but I'll just say what I have to say and then see what you guys come up with in terms of your perspectives on, especially if you're in event source systems, if you're doing event modeling, if you've introduced small design up front successfully. I think you'll see that a lot of these traditional places, these traditional roles change. Definitely the positions in companies should be more flexible. I think there's a very bad thing in the industry saying that geeks are not interested in what the client has to say, or they don't want to do that, they just want to code. I don't think that's true either. They have to look at requirements, understand them, talk to people about those requirements. There is no getting around that. Secondly, that's not true for everyone. There's a ton of developers. We have a lot of developers that love talking to the clients, and they have no problem discussing what the system should do. And event modeling gives you that canvas to do that with. And I think what I've seen, at least from my perspective, as we ebb and flow through our business is that there's definitely people that feel threatened with the fact that their position, that entire middle management piece, can be gone. And I think when it comes to analyzing management structures and looking at things in hard times, when you have to buckle up because there's a recession or there's not enough customers for whatever reason, the first people to go, first of all, it's people that go first because they're the most expensive. You have to pay them hourly. You have to pay them their salaries. So that's the first thing to get cut is people. Then you look at the value of the people. There's the people that hold the money. Well, they're not going to go because if they go, the money goes. Then there's the people that actually do the work, that code and put features on the table to be sold so that more money can come in. So you can't really get rid of them. And this is not just programming, this is anything. So middle management always has a target on its back. If the trend goes the wrong way, they have a really tough time showing their value. I think it becomes really, really bad once you start to have multiple layers of management. And that's usually done because you have to scale, blah, 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 and all this. And usually because you have to scale quite a lot of channels of communications and things like that. Once that's there, then you have optics, and it's really, no one will say it, but people are fighting for their jobs. They're not fighting for the value. I mean, a lot of times the right answer is like, I will quit because you will save this much money and my value is not as much as the programmers or the other people beside me. No one's going to say that. They gotta feed their kids and all that. So that's where the tough analysis comes in when we're talking about event modeling, because if we are changing and disrupting the industry, roles disappear. And so doing event modeling is actually going to be hard in terms of introducing this concept to an established company, one that's been around. Event modeling is going to be incredibly easy for new companies because it paints the picture of never having to deal with middle management and how to do it properly. So that's kind of a brain dump of a reflection of initial 5 years of running this business and seeing different types of customers and their management structures, their relationships internally, etc. The startups, they need to see it. I mean, if there's a way to not have to hire someone else, that's great. The problem comes in when VCs see something out of the ordinary and say, well, you don't have a CTO. How can you continue to scale without a CTO? They're still stuck in really old ways of thinking. It's like today, you can have a senior dev that gets event sourcing be your CTO. It's a role to fulfill. But the VCs will still see, I need to color between these lines to paint a nice picture so that we can raise money. It's changing. I don't think it's changing fast enough for me anyway, but it is changing, and people are looking for new ways to do things. And I think doing things in this way, with events being the best way to do things, no large schema migrations, all the places where you trip up scaling a company from MVP to version 1, they don't exist. So what are your thoughts on what I just said? Any questions about the blasphemous things that I'm talking about here?
I have a question, Adam. How you organize structure from your experience? How you, let's say, in project where you participated, how you help small teams to organize structure without, typical structure, as you say, and without, let's say, CTO, without, this hierarchical structure?
Yeah, I guess I kind of take it for granted because I work in that environment, and I don't realize that many people have never had the luxury to look at an absolute startup with one person with an idea, all the way to a larger startup with 5 people, and then to a series 2 or whatever size company with 50 people or 100 people. So the idea is you need to have a vision. Everyone will tell you this, right? You need to have a vision of what the business is going to be doing, what the core benefit of doing business with you is. That doesn't go away no matter what. The second one is having a vision of how technically this will work. And a lot of times this is where people trip up. They can't translate the business vision to the technical vision. They get set, oh, are we going to do AWS? Are we going to scale in the cloud first, et cetera? It's almost always talking about infrastructure. And I think that's the biggest difference, is that idea that a CTO has to talk about just DevOps, CI, CD, all these things. They're really a distraction. The information transformations, as we keep talking about here, is that. And so I guess in my experience, to answer your question, it's been a benefit of being able to talk to people that don't have a lot of money to say, what is the shortest path to success? You just don't have room or money to hire a CTO to draw diagrams for you all day, or a project manager to play broken telephone between the owner and the developer. The owner needs to tell the developer, this is what I need, because I don't have money. I don't have another $120,000 to hire a CTO. I don't have another $120,000 a year to hire a PM. Whatever those roles are. I have, maybe a tester for $60,000. I don't have money. I just added up $300,000 for 1 year, on top of paying myself and paying the developer. That's a huge overhead.
This is can be kind of good start, but anyway, it's then if I can say, it kind of inflating. So as soon you're starting to grow, and then people starting to build a typical structure, which is kind of probably more comfortable. And then yes, you can start with small team, and then as team growing. So by nature, it will have a, let's say, team lead. You have I don't know, product manager who is responsible for something.
Well, we were able to, let's just say how large we were able to grow without those things, right? I mean, those are things people do. And how long can we do that without having an assigned role? I think it's quite large. I think it's underestimated. There's so, like I was saying earlier, there's people that have more, they have more aptitude to talk to people. There's introverts, extroverts. You have these things in your organization that are developers, and there's a lot of developers that were always held. So one of the things that happens in the industry is that there's a glass ceiling above development. Depending on which country you're in, maybe the culture is a little different. There is a quasi dev manager role, how you move to PM and things like this. It can be a very politically charged thing, especially once you move to management, especially if there's unions involved. That's an even bigger thing to worry about. So there's always a very definite wall that's made between technical and non-technical. And there's a lot of developers that want to do both, but traditionally, that ability is almost impossible to attain, except when you don't have that actual triangular management pyramid. And we've seen success with that on large scale before. I think the best examples are Valve and GitHub. They all started with a flat org structure, for better or worse. They had some cultural issues, etc., but we'll ignore that. They were able to deliver quite a lot of value in a flat structure. Valve is still flat for most intents and purposes. I think they're around 300 employees, and they only have a CEO and everyone else. It's entirely flat, and they're doing, I don't know what it is, $300 billion a year in business or something like that. I don't know what it is. It's just huge, right? I'm exaggerating, but they're per person, their value is incredibly high. So
I think probably similar approach. 37 Signals is using the class, and they also have a quite flat structure in there.
Yeah, I think a lot of, once they saw GitHub's success and Valve's success, there's a lot of people that said, I want to do that. I'm guilty of that too. I said, hey, that's really cool. If I was to run a company, and I already had experience of dealing with the politics and the traditional management structure, I'm like, if I can get away from that kind of environment, I'm super happy. If we can just do work and not worry about politics and optics and all this kind of stuff. That's wonderful. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist necessarily in some flat organizations, but it certainly is less likely to happen, or at least be, a way to climb the ladder, as they say, climb the management ladder in a large company. So, to try and answer your question more succinctly, I think it's being able to use the people that you have to their fullest potential. And I have, every day I have developers saying, like, how can I help? Can you, like, give me something to do to help you to run this project, or finish this? We're putting together a workshop that's going to be going live hopefully today. I hope that some of you go and attend. It'll be with Greg, and everyone will be 5 days. It'll be virtual, and it'll look at event modeling, event-driven architectures, CQRS, event sourcing as a way to run a company from the vision, the CEO, the boardroom, all the way through to implementation, deployment, maintenance, Kafka, event store, DevOps, everything. 5 days. It's pretty intense, but it's exactly kind of related to what you're asking, is how do you do that? I want that workshop to be a way for people to experience what we were able to do and where we want to get to.
Yeah, I think to start things quickly is important, but another one, how you basically keep the structure flat when you're growing, because you're starting to hire people, and by nature, kind of people starting to have different teams inside. So how you can continue to keep structure flat. So how you can develop this culture, and how you can keep this culture in company.
Yeah, I think a big part of the success is the value of the work is captured in two sides of work. So time and materials work, where you just have to build platforms. You have to build your platform, you have to build your infrastructure, and then there's the actual features. And we talk about this with the slices all the time. That distinction is very important, because what that allows you to do is measure quite concretely where your investment is. So, we had Thomas was talking about some things in the chat. I just missed that. Sorry about that, Thomas. I'll get to your questions. Yeah, I think that division of really knowing your velocity allows you to make the structural changes a little bit easier to deal with. For example, onboarding brand new person. We had this. I use this as an example. Someone that has a different stack experience, they want to learn this one. Having fixed costs on things that deliver value allows you to not worry about it. It's something that's self-managing. So these things that don't need management, that don't need artificial meetings like Agile requires you to do, like, oh, we have a stand-up, we have this. It looks like that's kind of what it's doing for you, but it's artificial. It's not natural. It's not something that that has. I mean, just looking at people that are, a lot of the people that we have are sick and tired of that. They don't want to be in stand-ups every day. They want to be treated like adults. They know that they're working. They don't need to be checked in on, because we have, there's a question about, do you have an experienced architect to keep people focused, right? We do and we don't. I mean, the architecture speaks for itself. We don't need to manage the architecture. If a client needs something new, we work with them to build that architecture. Maybe they need a new platform. For one client, we had to do mobile first for everything. We had to shove everything that we did on servers into the actual application. And so that was time and materials, but that gave a new platform. It was really who can do the job best, and do we have time to do that? And the answer was yes. And so we took the project on and finished it. So keeping that structure, maybe if this company was more than the current, we ebb and flow between 12 people and 30 people, depending on how many projects we have. And so far, we've only had to appoint people. There was never a role that was required. And maybe that's how you kind of get to know people, and if they don't get treated with extra money or whatever, they just know that they're spending some of their time doing these other things, yet they can still bill for that time. That's okay. Um, the problem with the management structure is that it introduces like, oh, well, I report to you. Why are you making less money? I mean, that just starts to add, a lot of complications. And there's exceptions. You have a super experienced, very highly productive programmer that, demands a large salary, and they'll make more than their PM that happens to have only 5 years or 10 years experience or whatever, and the senior person's 30. So you can make an excuse on seniority. But the reporting structure certainly does add a bit of these optics problem. And so you have to go around that. You have to have policies around that you have these roles pay this much, and this is how they're adjusted for seniority. This is how they're adjusted for your overall seniority versus the seniority at the company. It gets really muddy, right? So I definitely, you can see how an HR department has to come into play. It just starts to boil over onto its own problem, and now you're just worrying about organizing yourself rather than working on the true things you need to be building, right? So
yeah, so in other words, you just go, when you're growing, you just continue focusing on the same approach, trying to keep the slices, focusing
yeah,
around slices, and basically.
I do. That's a big help. But I think a big lesson from Valve is keeping those kind of pods I mean, one of the things, if you ever read the Valve handbook, new employee handbook, and if you haven't, you should, just to see how companies like that try to make kind of a vision or whatever for however they're going to work. And that was these self-organizing teams that that can basically work on a project. So they'd go around. We have a new video game we're going to make. There's going to be a team of 5. Do we have at least one person that can do graphics as well, right? I think there was that multidisciplinary thing happening already there. So yeah, I like doing art. If I was working as a programmer at a video game company, I'd say, hey, if these other characters aren't drawn yet, I'm kind of done with my module for whatever AI movement or whatever I was programming. I'd say I'll just take the next week to just help the art team to finish up these these enemies that we're drawing or whatever. And I think being flexible like that, really listening to what the people you're working with are good at and what they want to do. We have our developers helping our clients do sales, right? We have one company that's doing like COVID tracking, and some of the guys are going to their local neighborhoods like, hey, look what our company made, and like walk the owner through that. Like, that's the type of outside the box thinking that's going to help you make a business case for erasing the artificial boundaries in a company, right? And just listening to people, knowing that they're not just plugs to put into the holes that you have missing in your company. A lot of times, it's heads down. You're a programmer. We got to crack these things out and get them done. But there's a lot of in between time, and maybe structuring that might need some more might need some. People don't want to be thrashing around, changing context 50 times a day to do all these things. But that's not to say you shouldn't do any context switching, and you should be able to do, a couple of things if you can. I mean, if you can't, that's fine. There's some developers, some people in whatever positions they are, they'll just want to do their job and get on with it, and that's what they like doing, and that's that. But there's a big percentage of people that have related skills, and if you're not finding those opportunities for them, you're missing out. And
Yeah, I think it's probably important to hire right people, right? Because it's not everyone can work in such flat structure. What I mean by this, let's say, imagine you have a developer who working for outsourcing company for many years, and then he joining you and you have self-organized structure. So you need to help him kind of onboard him. So, so he will feel part of it, and he will change. It will be like a cultural shift for him or for her.
Yeah. Uh-oh. You're muted for some reason.
Just making points. So I think it's also important kind of cultural aspect of this. It's I look into this handbook right now. Yeah, it's looking really cool.
Yeah, the handbook is really good. So let me just get to Thomas's questions. Oh, he's on an open office. Okay, that's why he couldn't talk. Thomas, yeah. We can talk about the cultural things in open offices. There's definitely been a pushback against open offices lately. So let's see. What did you say? How to focus on top of the iceberg functional requirements without worrying about the rest. Yeah. So, I mean, after a few years, we have a lot of boilerplate code. If you could call it kind of our framework or our base libraries that we use for all of the being able to deploy a web application, to deploy a mobile application with a RESTful API behind the scenes. We have boilerplate for all of that. So what you really want to do, and you should be able to do this in a company, is not to make everything a snowflake. And we really want copy paste of previous projects. I have an unrelated client that wants, I don't know, a hotel system, but I should be able to take my inventory system and really just change the contents of the events and commands and the logic and the command handlers and event handlers, and change the screens bit by bit to make the old project look like that one. And I think slices allow you to do that. And once you get the cadence of saying, like, well, whatever the business wants, it's just like the other project. Copy paste the whole thing, and now you're just working. Your real work is getting the requirements right. I think people really don't know how much of the real work and the problems in software is getting the requirements right. I think that management structure tries to hide the fact that people kind of drop things down without doing the due diligence to see exactly what the requirements are. That's why you have BA roles and things like that where you really don't need them. A BA role is an indirect way of saying that the same conversation that a BA is going to have with a developer could have been had with the client directly. And there's a lot of developers that are never given the chance because they're like, well, the BA studied this and that. And I've come across that all the time. It's like, you know what? Most developers are smart enough that they will have a proper conversation if they've been around the block with a business owner or a client to understand what it is they want. And more importantly, if you have event modeling, to really show what the done is done, what done is done looks like how does the system function, and not hide behind a whole bunch of paperwork and formal definitions of use case stories and a lot of these things. So I've seen that because we needed to work with smaller budgets, there's just no room to spend hours on making user stories. There's just no room for all those things. And just like with event sourcing and CKRS, there is no room for a SQL, ODBC connection. There is no room for these things. The event must be written as soon as possible. The logic must act on it in memory. That's how CKRS and event sourcing was born. It was through extreme conditions to show this is the way you scale systems. And I think what we're experiencing here, because we have a tough time to sell a brand new concept. So we're also in a high pressure situation where we don't have room for crap. So if I say, well, you need a CTO, it's like, really? I don't have the money for a CTO. How are we going to still make this work? Like, oh, well, we just don't have a business. I'm like, no, we have a business. I can show you how we can still build this without a CTO and be successful. It's those challenges that we can answer by doing something like an event model, and have an event-centric, way of thinking. Embrace specification by example, not just at a technical level, but an entire understanding of the system. Show me how it works. Right? Don't hide behind, oh, well, this is not a proper user story. This is not a proper blah, blah. It's like, no time for that. Sorry. Sounds like you don't have to worry about race conditions and event sourcing. Um, I guess not. Well, that's a very deep question because you're talking about computing specific things. I think one of the ways out of locking and mutexes is by queue, queuing things, queues and stacks, etc. When you're trying to think about what you're going to do in parallel, you start to answer deadlock problems and race conditions by adding queuing. I think it's one of those first kind of problems that got answered by doing distributed, like had to be answered in distributed systems. And so if you look at the really large systems, let's say Bitcoin for example, and how that communicates, you look at 0MQ. 0MQ has a lot of awesome patterns. It doesn't do any persistence, but it does the different type of queuing and the different types of patterns that you have between different amount of publishers and subscribers and topics and how you delegate that. So if you haven't looked at 0MQ, look at 0MQ. That's a really good project for, again, one of those things that survived extreme conditions. Oh, we have one ledger for the entire world, right? How are we going to communicate? 0MQ. It doesn't need a backend to run. There is no server. It's a library on each node, right? So yeah, ZMQ, 0MQ, like it's got that, or that weird zero with a slash in it, which I think is also, could be a Swedish letter. I forget which one they used. But yeah, 0MQ is I ran a meetup on 0MQ years ago in Vancouver, well before Bitcoin became a real big thing. So anyway, yeah, but what made you say that it sounds like you don't have to worry about race conditions and event sourcing? Uh, and I'm not sure how it relates to our stack. I'm guessing that comes from the fact that we can use the same code base from project to project, that we don't have to worry about race conditions. And I guess that's true. I mean, if we're doing each project with an event model, the only way that we get things done is through processors, and processors can only work off of those to-do read models, those views, those to-do views. And that's what gives you your like your ability to serialize things properly and not have, not have locks, because you're always looking at what the next set of to-do items is. If there's bugs too. I mean, we've had one thing spin out of control once and burn a server because the workflow had an error and you just kept resubmitting the same job round and round. So there will be bugs, but I'd rather be dealing with bugs in a system that leaves proper evidence and breadcrumbs as to what the issue was than something that always will require a debugging session. I mean, that's a horrible thing to do. So these views generally will, and a good number of them will be materialized on a table somewhere, and you can figure out pretty quickly what's going on. So yeah, we don't have these like chasing race conditions issues forever. In 5 years, we haven't had a single race condition bug. That if we did, it was fixed within under our 4 hours.